Today's topic is effective introductions. Let's get started. What makes a good presentation? This is a question we are going to be answering throughout this series. One of the most basic parts of a good presentation is a good introduction. Your introduction is the first thing your audience will hear you say. It is important to say something interesting that will capture the attention of the audience and will make them want to listen. Today we're going to talk about the 4 parts of a good introduction: a greeting, an opener, a topic statement, and a preview. The first part of a good introduction is a greeting. In a greeting, you should say hello and introduce yourself to your audience. Let's look at 2 examples of a good greeting. Number 1. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah and I'm happy to speak with you today. Number 2. Good afternoon, my name is Lisa. I'm excited to be here with you today. As you can see, we should say hello, give our name, and connect with the audience. The second part of a good introduction is an opener. An opener is a hook that can grab the audience's attention. Let's look at 6 common types of openers: a quotation or proverb, a story, a question, a general statement, an instruction or task, and an interesting fact or statistic. Let's look at some examples of each of these types of openers. We are going to imagine that we are giving a presentation about learning a language. Number 1, a quotation or a proverb. A Chinese proverb says, "To learn a language is to have one more window from which to view the world." Number 2, a story. Recently, my Korean friend told me that she feels like a different person when she speaks English. This made me curious about what it is like to learn another language. Number 3, a question. Have you ever tried to learn another language? Number 4, a general statement. I'm sure we all agree that learning another language is not easy. Number 5, an instruction or a task. Please close your eyes. Now, imagine you are in a foreign country and no one speaks the same language as you. Okay, open your eyes. Number 6, an interesting fact or statistic. About 43% of the world's population can speak a second language fluently. These are all excellent ways to catch the audience's attention and make them want to listen to what you have to say. After we have caught the audience's attention, we should move on to the third part of a good introduction. The third part of a good introduction is a topic statement. A topic statement tells the audience the main subject of our presentation. It can be just one sentence that shows what topic we are going to talk about. Let's look at 2 examples of good topic statements. Number 1. Today I want to tell you about my experience learning a second language. Number 2. Today I'm going to share my language learning journey with you. The last part of a good introduction is a preview. In a preview, we tell the audience what details about the topic we will discuss. It is like a short map of our presentation that shows what points we will stop at along the way. Let's look at some examples of good previews. Number 1. I'll explain how I made the decision to learn another language, what it is like to be a language student, and how it has changed my life. Number 2, I'd like to tell you how I made the decision to learn another language, what it was like to be a language student, and how it has changed my life. Now that we have looked at all 4 parts of a good presentation, let's put it together. Here are 2 examples of good introductions. Number 1. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah, and I'm happy to speak with you today. A Chinese proverb says, to learn a language is to have one more window from which to look at the world. Today I want to tell you about my experience learning a second language. I'll explain how I made the decision to learn another language, what it was like to be a language student, and how it changed my life. Number 2. Good afternoon, my name is Lisa. I'm excited to be here with you today. Recently, my Korean friend told me that she feels like a different person when she speaks English. This made me curious about what it was like to learn another language. Today, I'm going to share my language learning journey with you. I'd like to tell you how I made the decision to learn another language, what it was like to be a language student, and how it changed my life. Remember, for a good introduction, we need a greeting, an opener, a topic statement, and a preview. Okay, students, that's it for today's video on how to make a good introduction to your presentation. Today's topic is writing an effective body. Let's get started. The body is the main part and the longest part of our presentation. It can feel a little stressful to write a long section in English. So today, let's talk about how to make that process a little easier. We're going to learn how to brainstorm and use a graphic organizer, how to determine important information, and body paragraph writing tips. Remember, throughout this series, we are imagining that we have to write and give a presentation about learning a second language. Before we write a body, we have to spend some time thinking about what we want to talk about. So far, all I know is that I have to give a presentation about my experience learning a second language. There are so many things I could talk about. A great way to narrow it down is by brainstorming, making a mind map, and then using those 2 things to organize our body paragraphs. First, I'm going to brainstorm and write a list of what comes to mind when I think about this topic, learning a second language. Learning a second language makes me think of why I decided to learn a second language, the difficulty and stress of learning a second language, TOEFL tests, good teachers and bad teachers I've had, traveling and using the second language, different jobs I could have because I can speak more than one language, how long it takes to study, studying with friends, and my language goals for the future. Okay. There's a lot on this list, and I could add a lot more. So now I'm going to look at my list and try to choose what I want to talk about in my presentation. For our example, let's imagine that I have to write 3 paragraphs for my body. So I'm going to try and choose 3 themes that I see in my list that I'll talk about in my body paragraphs. So let's see. Well, I definitely want to talk about why I decided to learn a second language, so that'll be topic number 1. Let's see what's next. TOEFL tests, teachers, and studying. Topic number 2 is going to be what it's like to be an English student. And then we have traveling, jobs, and goals. My third topic will be how learning English has changed my life. As you can see, I looked at my brainstorming list and I found themes in what I wrote. This is a great way to determine what you really want to talk about and write about in your presentation. Now that I've determined what topics I want to talk about, it's time to make a mind map. Here I have my main topic, the topic of my presentation at the top, my experience learning English. Below that, I have my 3 subtopics that I chose from making that brainstorming list. Why I decided to learn English, what it's like to be an English student, and how English has changed my life. Next, I'm going to add details to each topic to help me organize and write my body. So when we're adding details, we want to just write whatever we think about when we're considering this topic. We don't have to write incomplete sentences, and we can write as many things as we want. This is our opportunity to think about what we really want to talk about and just do some brainstorming. So let's begin with why I decided to learn English. Okay, when I think of that, I think for better opportunities. I love English music and movies, and all my friends were doing it. When I think of what it's like to be an English student, I think it can be difficult and stressful. There are some boring classes, and there's a lot of study and practice involved. And how English has changed my life. I can travel and use English now. I've made some English-speaking friends, and I can order food in English. Okay, I could add as many details as I want to my mind map, but here we have 3 examples under each topic. Next, I need to do the step, determine important information. I have a lot of ideas here, but I don't want my presentation to be too long. So I'm going to look and choose what I think is important to talk about and what is maybe not so important to talk about. So let's go ahead and look at our examples and see maybe what I can X out that I don't really need to talk about. So why I decided to learn English. Let's see, opportunities, English music and movies, and all my friends were doing it. Maybe I don't want to talk about all of my friends doing it, and I'll focus more on my motivation. What it's like to be an English student. Let's see, difficult and stressful, some boring classes, a lot of study and practice. Well, I want my presentation to be positive, so I will not talk about my boring classes. Finally, how English has changed my life. I can travel and use English. I have English-speaking friends, and I can order food in English. Maybe talking about ordering food in English is not so important. So as you can see here, I just went through and looked at all of the many things that I thought of when I was brainstorming and crossed out things that were not important. Okay, great. Now that I have finished my brainstorm, my mind map, and I have chosen what I want to talk about, it's time to really write. Let's talk about some helpful tips for writing your body paragraphs. We're going to learn some quick tips about using transition words, adding details, and adding interest. First, let's refresh our memories and look at an example of an effective introduction. As we can see, an effective introduction has 4 parts: a greeting, an opener, a topic statement, and a preview. The preview shows what we're going to talk about in our presentation. It is best to keep your presentation topics in the same order you used in your presentation. So here I say in my preview, I'll explain how I made the decision to learn another language, what it was like to be a language student, and how it has changed my life. So first, I'll talk about the decision to learn another language. Second, what it was like to be a language student. And third, how it has changed my life. This brings us to transition words. Transition words are words and phrases used to connect one idea to the next. There are over 200 examples of transition words in the English language. So today, let's just focus on the most common and useful ones for a presentation. First, we have sequence transition words. Sequence words are used to show the order things are going in, or if we're talking about time, we can say this happened first, second, third, and so on. We can also use words like then, next, after that, and finally. One common way we see sequence transition words used in presentations in the body section is to start the paragraph. For example, first I will talk about how I made the decision to learn another language. Next we have effect and consequence transition words. These are words and phrases that we use when we want to talk about why something happened or the effect that something had. These are terms like as a result, because of that, consequently, therefore, and thus. For example, I learned English. As a result, I made some friends who also speak English. Finally, we have giving examples, transition words that we would use for giving examples. Of course, if you're giving a presentation, you will give many examples of what you're talking about. So we can use phrases like, for instance, for example, in fact, such as, and to demonstrate. I could say, learning English was very difficult. I had to study a lot. For example, one night I studied vocabulary words for 3 hours. So these are terms we use to give examples about the things that we're talking about in our presentation. Next, let's talk about adding details. Details make a presentation relatable and more interesting to the audience. It's important to add details to really bring your presentation to life. So what kind of details can we add? First, we can think of WH questions like who, what, when, where, why, and how to expand on our ideas and help us to really expand and flesh out what we want to talk about. We can include backstory. We can think of what would help our audience understand our thoughts or why we did certain things or why we understood certain things and tell them a little bit about what brought us to that point. It's important that you do not overuse details. We don't want to get so far away from the main point with too many details that the audience loses interest. Remember to just include what's important and don't give unnecessary details. Finally, let's talk about adding interest. What are some things we can add to the body of our presentation to make it more interesting? If you remember, in the first video of this series, we learned how to write an effective introduction. Part of an introduction is an opener. The opener is something interesting that grabs the audience's attention. Now, these interesting things can be used in our body as well. This includes things like a quotation or proverb, a story, a question, a general statement, an instruction or a task, and an interesting fact or statistic. These are interesting things that we can use to keep the audience interested throughout our whole presentation. Okay, now that we've learned how to brainstorm, make a mind map, determine important information, and have also learned some helpful tips for writing the body, let's go ahead and look at an example body paragraph together. Okay. We are going to make an example body paragraph using the first subtopic in our mind map that we came up with. Why I decided to learn English. And here we have the details we came up with. For better opportunities, and I love English music and movies. Let's go ahead and look at an example paragraph for this subtopic. First, I'd like to tell you why I decided to learn English. We can all agree that it is a big decision to make, right? Well, there are many things that help me make this choice. Growing up, I loved English music and movies. When I was a kid, I would listen to songs on the radio and longed to know what they meant. Additionally, I knew that learning English could give me better opportunities. It is my dream to own a business, and I knew that learning English would help me make better business deals and work with business owners in different countries. I knew that English would help me be more successful. Okay. Let's go ahead and look a little closer at this paragraph. As you can see, there are transition words like first and additionally. We also have some examples from our openers that we can use, like a general question. And I also told a story about when I was growing up. We can see a lot of details, like down here, giving a backstory. It's my dream to own a business, and I knew that this would give me better opportunities. This is a great example of a body paragraph, and I hope you use this example and the tips in this video to make your very best presentation. Okay, students, that's it for today's lesson on how to write an effective body. Today we're going to learn how to write an effective conclusion. Let's get started. Before we talk about a conclusion, let's review. What are the parts of a presentation? Well, first there's the introduction. This was the first video in this series. We talked about how to write an effective introduction. Next is the body. This is the main part of the presentation and the longest. There was another video in this series about how to write an effective body. Last but not least, today let's talk about how to write an effective conclusion. So here we go. What is an effective conclusion? Effective means that it works well, right? So let's look at what are the three parts of an effective conclusion. A good conclusion has a signal phrase, a review sentence, and a closer. We are going to talk about each of these parts in this video. Let's begin by talking about a signal phrase. A signal phrase is the first part of our effective conclusion. A signal phrase is a phrase or a word that shows the audience that you are ending your presentation. So after we have said our body, we need to start our conclusion with a signal phrase. It signals or shows, okay, this is the end of my presentation now. Let's take a look at a few signal phrases you could start your conclusion with. Some great signal phrases are, to conclude, let me end by saying, to sum up, in conclusion, in closing, and so. All of these phrases indicate or show to the audience that we are ending our presentation. This is it, we're all done. Let's take a look at some sentences that begin with signal phrases. Throughout this series, we have been using a presentation about learning a second language as an example. So for our introduction video, we learned how to write an introduction for a presentation all about what it's like to learn a second language, and same for the body video. So we'll do the same here. let's see how we could begin a conclusion in a presentation about learning a second language. To conclude, learning a second language has had an important impact on my life. As you can see in this example, to conclude means to end, to finish. So we're showing that we're ending. We could also say something like, in closing, I am so glad I decided to learn English. Or, so, learning another language can really affect your life. We see that we start our conclusion sentence, our first conclusion sentence, with a signal phrase and some kind of summary of what we have been talking about. To conclude, this has had a big impact on my life. So what comes after a signal phrase? Well, now that we know what a signal phrase is, let's talk about the next part of an effective conclusion, the review sentence. A review sentence summarizes what you have talked about in your presentation and reminds the audience of the main or most important points of your presentation. So it's a little summary, a little reminder. The body is very long, or can be very long, in a presentation, right? So at the end, we can include a review sentence to remind the audience what we talked about and what was most important. So let's take a look at some examples of review sentences. So again, we're using the example of a presentation about learning a second language. So here's an example of a review sentence. As you can see, even though it has been difficult, it was a decision that helped me make new friends and improved my chances of getting a better job. So here in this example, I talked about what was the most important thing in my presentation. What were the most important points that I talked about? Here's another example, and a shorter example. Overall, it has been a challenging but joyful experience. So these two examples are some different ways we can write a review sentence. We can, in example number 1, kind of summarize some things that we talked about in the presentation. So in my presentation, I talked about how learning a second language has helped me meet new people and help me find a better job. That's okay. We can also just have a short sentence really explaining how we feel overall about the whole experience. As you can see, and overall are two phrases we can use to start a review sentence, but you don't really need a special word to start your review sentence. These are just some suggestions. All right, so we've talked about a signal phrase. We've talked about the review sentence. Now let's look at the closer of an effective conclusion. A closer leaves the audience with a final, memorable thought. It's similar to an opener. So if you remember in the first video when we talked about effective introductions, we talked about openers, of which there were 6 kinds, right, that we can use. A closer is similar to an opener because it should be interesting and leave a good impression. So let's look at the 6 different kinds of closers and some example sentences. 6 common closers that we can use are a thought or comment about the future, a recommendation or invitation, a statement about the topic's importance, a call to action or encouraging someone to do something, a quote or proverb, which we can also use as an opener, right? And a request for others to do the same, to do something. So let's go ahead and see examples of these 6 types of closers. First, let's take a look at a thought or comment about the future. Here's an example. I am confident that as long as I continue to put forth effort, learning a second language will benefit my life. So here we're talking about the future. I will continue to work on this, on learning a second language, and so it will continue to benefit my life. How about a recommendation or invitation? Remember that when you are learning another language, it is motivating to think of why it's important to you. So here, a recommendation from my experience. How about a statement about the topic's importance? Why is it important to learn a second language in this case? Learning another language really does open up new doors to opportunities and friendships that will change your life. So here, kind of summarizing, why did I present about this topic? Why is it important? Next, a call to action. Why don't you try learning another language? Often a call to action means we're asking the audience to do something related to our topic. Why don't you try? Next, we have a quote or proverb. Just like in an opener, where we can use a quote or proverb, we can also use one in our closer. For example, I'd like to end with a quote. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. And finally, a request for others to do something or to share. Now that you've heard about my experience, I'd love to hear about yours. So here now we're asking the audience to share about their experience. And these are 6 common, useful, and effective closers for our conclusion. All right, so we've talked about the signal phrase, we've talked about the review, and now ding, 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 we learned about the closer. So let's put it all together and see some examples of full, effective conclusions. Here's example number 1. To conclude, learning a second language has had an important impact on my life. As you can see, even though it has been difficult, it was a decision that helped me make new friends and improved my chances of getting a better job. I am confident that as long as I continue to put forth effort, learning a second language will benefit my life. Thank you. So what we see here, we have our signal phrase, our review, our closer, and of course at the end we want to thank the audience. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at one more example of an effective conclusion. Okay, here's example number 2, a little shorter, but still very effective. Here is example number 2. In closing, I am so glad I decided to learn English. Overall, it has been a challenging but joyful experience. I'd like to end with a quote. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. Why don't you try expanding your own limits? Thank you. Okay, so let's look at this. We have our signal phrase, our review, and our closer. So if you notice here, I actually used 2 closers. I used a quote and a call to action because it was related to the quote. So sometimes, yes, you can use more than one closer if you really want a very effective finish. And then, of course, again, we end with thank you. So remember, an effective conclusion has a signal phrase, a review sentence, and a closer.